This is one of the most desolate and unforgiving regions on Earth. Kholat Syakhl in the northern Ural Mountains, where freezing winds rule, known by locals as the Mountain of the Dead. The date is the winter of 1959. In the Soviet Union, under the shadow of the Cold War, 9 experienced mountaineers set out on a journey from which they would never return. What they left behind was not only frozen bodies, but a chilling mystery, unsolved for more than 60 years, fueling countless conspiracy theories, films, and books. Their tent had been cut and ripped open, as if they were fleeing a danger from within. Despite the minus 30-degree cold and the darkness of night, the team abandoned their survival equipment and left the campsite. Some were half-dressed, others were out on the snow in nothing but socks. Even stranger were the injuries on the bodies. Some suffered inexplicable trauma comparable to being hit by a high-speed vehicle. Yet there were no signs of a struggle and no evidence of a wild animal attack. With no rational explanation, Soviet investigators closed the file with a note. An unknown compelling force. So what really happened on that mountainside that night? After decades of speculation, modern science finally managed to shed light on that dark night, thanks to 19th century mechanical data, simulation technology, and the meticulous work of Swiss researchers. The answer was not hidden in some mysterious force from the sky, but in the deadly mathematics of snow and wind. The story begins with a group led by a brilliant 23-year-old engineering student named Igor Dyatlov. This team, 7 men and 2 women from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, were not ordinary hikers. Among them was a sports instructor who was also a World War II veteran. They were highly experienced at surviving harsh winter conditions. Their goal was to reach Mount Otterten, one of the hardest places to access at the time. They set out on January 23, 1959. The last photos from their diaries and cameras showed high morale and a cheerful adventure despite the brutal conditions. But on the night of February 1st, everything changed. The group strayed slightly from their planned route and decided to camp on the slope of Kholat Syakhl, the Mountain of the Dead. It was a bare, wind-exposed spot above the tree line near the summit. They dug into the snow to create a flat platform for their tent, ate dinner, and climbed into their sleeping bags. It would be the last thing they ever did. Weeks later, when search and rescue teams reached the area, what they found was a scene even the most seasoned experts couldn't make sense of. The tent was barely visible under the snow, and it had been cut open from the inside, slashed outward with a knife. That detail showed the group, faced with an immediate life-threatening danger, didn't even have time to use the entrance. They tore their way out in panic. That panic was only the beginning of the chain of events that led to their deaths. Even stranger were the footprints in the snow. Some were barefoot, some wore only a single sock. They had left their boots, clothing, and survival gear inside the tent and ran into the freezing darkness toward the forest line. The first group of bodies was found under a cedar tree beside the remains of a fire. But as the snow melted and the searches continued for months, the scale of the incident became even more complex. The condition of the other 4 hikers found in a ravine turned the case from a simple freezing incident into a mystery. Autopsy reports showed severe internal trauma, yet there were no external signs of impact, no bruises, no cuts. It was as if an enormous pressure had affected them from the inside. Some bodies also showed deformities caused by months of exposure to the elements. The Soviet authorities rushed closure of the investigation, along with claims of low-level radioactive traces on some clothing, only thickened the fog around the case. For years, people debated what could have driven these experienced mountaineers to flee their tent in panic and suffer such serious internal injuries. Could an avalanche have struck? Experts at the time dismissed it. The slope where the tent was pitched looked too flat. There had been no snowfall that night, and most importantly, there was at least a 9-hour gap between the snowcut they made to set up the tent and the moment the disaster occurred. That's when, 60 years later, 2 scientists from Switzerland stepped in, Alexander Puzrin of ETH Zurich and Johan Gaume of EPFL in Lausanne. One a geotechnical engineer, the other an expert leading a snow avalanche simulation lab. Puzrin and Gaume first disproved the slope was too flat argument. The uneven shape of snow-covered terrain can make the incline look gentler than it really is. In fact, the campsite was close to the critical 30-degree threshold for avalanche formation. And the cut the hikers made in the snow to pitch their tent had destabilized the slope. But the key question remained, why not immediately? Why 9 hours later? The answer lay in katabatic winds, heavy, freezing air masses flowing downhill, carrying and depositing large amounts of snow. According to the researchers' models, the powerful winds that night continuously piled fresh snow on top of the snow block the hikers had cut. Hour by hour, the growing load began to overwhelm the weak, slippery layer beneath, and finally, around midnight, it reached the breaking point. But this wasn't a typical avalanche, an enormous roaring mass of snow. It was a far more stealthy and rare phenomenon, a slab avalanche, A hard snow slab about 5 meters long, roughly the size of an SUV, broke loose and dropped onto the tent. Small, but deadly. That also explained why no massive avalanche scar was found at the site. The broken slab was relatively small and was quickly buried and erased by fresh snowfall. So how could this small slab cause the severe trauma described in the autopsy reports? This is where science turned to advanced simulations and adapted avalanche models to the case, aiming to model how snow impacts the human body. Another crucial data set came from vehicle safety testing in the 1970s, where automotive companies studied the forces the human body experiences during collisions. The data proved an eerily good match for the Dyatlov case. Because the hikers had laid their sleeping gear on top of their skis to insulate themselves from the ground, the surface beneath them became extremely hard and rigid. When the computer models were run, the results were shocking. A hardened, ice-cold, heavy slab of snow dropping onto people lying on a rigid surface produced exactly the kind of injuries described in the reports. Severe internal damage to the chest and head. The impact left little or no external wounds, but subjected bones and internal organs to extreme pressure. While most avalanche victims die from suffocation, these specific physical conditions explained why the Dyatlov group suffered traumatic injuries. So what exactly happened that night? The reconstructed scenario goes like this. The group pitched their tent on the slope of the Mountain of the Dead, cutting into the snow to shelter from the wind, an action that unknowingly created a lethal risk. Through the night, katabatic winds steadily increased the snow load above the tent. While they slept, at the critical moment, the heavy slab collapsed onto them. In the impact, some were seriously injured. The entrance was blocked, and the weight made breathing difficult. In panic, driven by pure survival instinct, they pulled out knives and tore their way out from the inside. They didn't abandon their injured friends. They dragged them out of the wreckage. The tent was no longer usable. Their boots and clothing were buried inside. In minus 30 degrees, in the middle of a storm, half-dressed, their only chance was to reach the forest below. But nature was merciless. At the tree line, they tried to start a fire, but hypothermia was already taking over their minds and bodies. Some died by the fire. Others may have tried to descend into the ravine for better shelter. But it wasn't enough. Expeditions in 2021 and later supported Puzrin and Gaume's theory. Researchers observed that the region does carry avalanche risk, and that similar snow movements can occur under comparable conditions. These findings eliminated most long-standing theories and left the most plausible explanation. This discovery transforms the Dyatlov Pass incident from a horror story into a tragic natural disaster, but it doesn't lessen its impact. If anything, it deepens it. Because these were not victims destroyed by mysterious forces, but 9 young people who resisted nature's unpredictable power with friendship and courage, who refused to abandon their injured companions, who risked their lives to pull them out of hell, and who held on to one another until their final breaths. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy historical mysteries illuminated by science, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you on the next discovery. Goodbye.